We also want to bring you this. A Fox News alert, Savannah Guthrie posting a very heartbreaking video this morning on the search for her mother, Nancy. And she is now offering a new $1 million reward. Let's go to Max Gordon. He is outside Nancy Guthrie's house today for an update.
At 2:01 a.m., a woman was seen screaming from a moving car, just 3 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. The same night, Nancy vanished from her bed. No license plate, no timestamp. No proof of life. And now, a $1.2 million reward. So what really happened in those missing minutes? Tonight, we're going to break down the disturbing porch footage with no timestamps. The second image that suggests the suspect may have been there before. The mysterious 911 call about a woman screaming from a dark Chevy Malibu. And the new forensic questions about DNA and overlooked evidence that could change everything. Because if this wasn't a random abduction, then someone planned it, and someone out there knows.
Hi there. I'm coming on to say it is day 24 since our mom was taken in the dark of night from her bed. And every hour and minute and second and every long night has been agony since then, of worrying about her and fearing for her and aching for her, and most of all, just missing her, We know that millions of you have been praying. So many people have been praying, of every faith and no faith at all, praying for her return. And we feel those prayers. Please keep praying without ceasing. We still believe. We still believe in a miracle. We still believe that she can come home. Hope against hope. As my sister says, we are blowing on the embers of hope. We also know that she may be lost. She may already be gone. She may have already gone home to the Lord that she loves and is dancing in heaven with her mom and her dad and with her beloved brother Pierce and with our daddy. And if this is what is to be, then we will accept it. But we need to know where she is. We need her to come home. For that reason, we are offering a family reward of up to $1 million for any information that leads us to her recovery. All of the information about this reward and the details is in the caption below. You can call the 1-800-TIP line. You can be anonymous if you want. Someone out there knows something that can bring her home. Somebody knows. And we are begging you to please come forward now. We also know that we are not alone in our loss. We know there are millions of families that have suffered with this kind of uncertainty. And for that reason today, we also are donating $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children for their work in helping families who are coping with loss and actively looking for those who are lost. We are hoping that the attention that has been given to our mom and our family will extend to all the families like ours who are in need and need prayers and need support. So please, if you hear this message, if you've been waiting and you haven't been sure, let this be your sign. So please come forward, tell what you know, and help us bring our beloved mom home, so that we can either celebrate a glorious, miraculous homecoming or celebrate the beautiful, brave and courageous and noble life that she has lived. Please be the light in the dark. Thank you.
After watching Savannah speak, it's almost impossible to shift gears into analysis. Her strength, her exhaustion, the way her voice trembles but never breaks. It's day 24. Day 24 since Nancy Guthrie was taken from her bed in the dark of night. And I've studied cases, covered disappearances, analyzed crime scenes that most people couldn't even stomach. But this one feels different, because we're not just examining evidence tonight, we're watching a daughter hold on to hope in real time, and I've never seen anything quite like it. Welcome to Unraveled Crime, where we don't just tell stories, we uncover them. Thank you for being part of this mission. At some point in every case, emotion collides with evidence. If you've ever watched a seasoned investigator or trial analyst work, you'll notice something. They compartmentalize. They have to. Because separating heartbreak from facts is the only way to see the truth clearly. And tonight that balance is difficult. Before we examine porch footage, missing timestamps or forensic questions, we first have to listen carefully to what Savannah Guthrie revealed to the world. Her family has increased the reward to $1 million, building on the existing federal reward. But pay close attention to her words. Hope, miracles, and at the same time, the painful acknowledgement that her mother may already be gone. That emotional duality is important. In crisis psychology, families often move through stages: denial, anger, bargaining, despair, and sometimes acceptance. Savannah seems to be standing in more than one stage at once. Part of her is holding on to faith, praying without ceasing. Another part is preparing herself for the possibility of the worst outcome. There is also something strategic in the reward increase. If the person responsible believes there is no reason to come forward, because Nancy may no longer be alive, a 7-figure reward changes the equation, because information still carries value, even in tragedy. And perhaps the most striking detail, in the middle of their own suffering, the family is choosing to help others. They have donated $500,000 to support organizations helping families of missing children. That decision speaks not only to grief, but to character. It shows they are thinking beyond their own pain. Now, in the following clip, Nancy Grace questions a psychoanalyst about this very psychological dynamic: acceptance, faith, bargaining, and whether increasing the reward signals a deeper investigative or strategic intent. Listen closely, because what is said and what is implied may reshape how this case is understood moving forward.
Every trial lawyer, if they're a good trial lawyer, somehow compartmentalizes and tries the case and moves forward with a clear and concise analysis of the evidence in order to get a true verdict. And that is sometimes very, very hard. I want to analyze what we're hearing from Savannah herself before I go on to the evidence that we're learning about tonight. Number one, straight out to Dr. Bethany Marshall joining us, renowned psychoanalyst out of the LA jurisdiction. Dr. Bethany, she's making it very clear that her family is upping the reward to up to $1 million in addition to the FBI award, that reward, $202,000. But she makes it clear, in my understanding, that they recognize, this tastes like dirt in my mouth, that Mrs. Guthrie could have passed on. And this, as she quotes Thessalonians, asking everyone to pray without ceasing. Do you understand it the way I understand it, Dr. Bethany? She is saying that they have confronted the possibility their mom may have passed on and is with their dad and their uncle now, but yet still offering a $1 million reward and donating, at this time thinking of other people, donating $500,000 to National Center of Missing Exploited Children. But are you reading it as I am reading it? Are you interpreting it the same way, Dr. Bethany?
Mom's alive, she's going to come back. Anger, anger towards the kidnappers. And then there's the bargaining phase, if we do this, mom will come home. If we were just better citizens, she'll return to us. So they've gone to the acceptance stage, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. They're also people of faith, Nancy. They're profoundly spiritual, and they believe she's with them, whether she's in heaven or she's alive here on earth. But there's another factor, Nancy. This family, I believe, has considered the fact that the kidnappers will not go forward if she is deceased or if she died in the process of the kidnap. And they want to incentivize those kidnappers to come forth with information even if their mother is gone. And Nancy, one final thing is so profound. This family has the capacity for deep, deep empathy. When you're depressed and anxious, all you can think about is yourself. That's part of the human experience. Not this family. They are thinking about missing and exploited children and other families who have gone through something similar. That tells me something about their character and their capacity to love.
There's a difference between understanding acceptance and surrendering to it. And this case is not in the surrender phase. This remains a kidnapping investigation. There has been no body recovered, no confirmed cadaver detection, no scientific proof of death. Some may argue that the absence of proof of life points toward the worst possibility. That is a theory, but a theory is not a conclusion. Until authorities confirm otherwise, this is still treated as a rescue mission. And that distinction is critical, because the moment an investigation shifts from rescue to recovery, the entire investigative strategy changes. What is striking here is the contrast. While holding on to hope, Savannah Guthrie's family is also thinking beyond their own suffering, contributing significant funds to help organizations that support other families living through the same nightmare. In moments when grief tends to pull people inward, they chose to reach outward. And the emotional toll of this case is visible. Day after day, press conference after press conference, the weight of uncertainty growing heavier, the strength required to stand before the world and speak. Hope while preparing for the possibility of loss is something few people ever have to carry. Meanwhile, investigators are developing a theory, not driven by emotion, but by movement and behavior. The focus is on two images. Same porch. Possibly the same suspect. In one photograph, the individual appears to be carrying a backpack and what looks like a holster. In the second image, those items are absent. No backpack, no holster, and most importantly, no timestamp. If the images were captured on different nights, the implications are significant. It would suggest the possibility of pre-event surveillance, casing behavior, planning, and perhaps the involvement of more than one person. The absence of timestamps forces investigators into reconstruction, analysis, studying lighting patterns, background darkness, and environmental clues to determine whether the images were taken on the same night or on separate occasions. Was the suspect present earlier? Did he return later with more preparation? That is the question now driving part of the investigation. In the clip you're about to see, Nancy Grace presses investigative reporter Dave Mack about this exact theory, the discrepancy between the two porch images, the missing timestamps, and the possibility that the suspect may have visited the neighborhood before the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Pay close attention, because if these images came from different dates, the potential timeline of the suspect expands, and with it, the number of people investigators may need to consider.
I hear what you're saying and what Savannah is saying about acceptance. I'm not accepting anything. I'm not accepting until somebody tells me Mrs. Guthrie has passed on. This is a kidnap case. We have not found a body. We have not gotten a hit from a cadaver dog. We can all speculate what may have happened. And maybe many people believe that Miss Guthrie passed on early on, and that's why proof of life has not been offered. I understand that reasoning, but I am not accepting that it's too late to save her life. So that's my mission. That's the avenue down which I am proceeding. But I find it overwhelming that at a time like this, Savannah and her family are thinking of other people. She goes on to not only offer the $500,000 to missing exploited children, but she recognizes what other people are going through and that they are suffering too, and that she can identify with that suffering. For those of you just joining us, Savannah Guthrie, and you can see her getting tireder, more tired, more tired, more tired, in all of her missives, more broken, more haggard, more exhausted. And we're practically going through the process with her. When it first started and she was flanked by her brother and sister, then enduring claims by the media and others that the family is somehow responsible for Mrs. Guthrie's kidnap. The days stretching into days, stretching into weeks. We have lived through that with her as we watch her begging the public that reward again tonight. The FBI reward $200,002, nearly $250,000 now. The Guthries adding $1 million, up to $1 million. For Pete's sake, if you know anything about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, a mother and a grandmother, this is the time to come forward. And now we turn our attention, which for many of us is more comfortable to do than to be in that place of pain and suffering with Savannah, and turn our attention to the positive analysis of the facts. In the last hours, overnight, the theory has emerged, and we have addressed it here, I think possibly first, about the possibility that the perp has been in the neighborhood on an earlier date, that there is a second perp, but we can't tell all of this because the timestamps have been removed. They could not be salvaged. When Google went through the scratching process, trying to, out of literally trillions of data points, find Nancy Guthrie's door cam and resurrect it, like Lazarus, for Pete's sake, resurrect it from the dead so we could see the perp. Okay, straight out to Crime Stories, investigative reporter Dave Mack with the latest. What's the theory? I understand the part of the working theory as that this perp, the door guy, the porch guy, was in the neighborhood casing Nancy Guthrie's home before the night of the kidnap. Okay, explain that analysis to me. Explain what we think.
All right, Nancy, the reason that thought process is being brought up is because we have two very different photos of what appears to be the same person. In the one, we have him with his backpack on and the holster hanging down in front. That's where this alleged kidnapper is standing right in front of the Nest camera and trying to put the weeds on it. But then we also have this other photo that is in a similar looking size and shape of the Nest camera guy at the door, but he doesn't have the backpack and he doesn't have the holster. This is something that our team had separated early on, and it's like everybody now is just catching up. But we've been talking about this for over a week now, and yet there is no timestamp.
Before we dive deeper, let's slow down and look at what investigators are actually working with here. Because right now, nobody is celebrating certainty. In fact, as Nancy Grace pointed out in the conversation you're about to hear, we are not in the stage of conclusion. We are in the stage of examination. The FBI and digital forensic teams may already be ahead of public discussion, but the question remains the same. Place the two images side by side. That is where the working theory begins. Are these photographs from the same night, or were they captured on different dates? Because if the suspect approached Nancy Guthrie's home on a prior occasion, that changes the investigative landscape. Now look closely at the image on the right. Notice first what is missing. There is no backpack, no visible holster, yet the clothing appears similar, the same jacket, the same pants, and the same type of facial covering. But something else is interesting. The ground itself. The rocks near the porch appear to be arranged differently. We know Nancy Guthrie had a yard maintenance schedule, so investigators are asking a very specific question. Were those rocks moved? Or were they naturally repositioned over time? Lighting is another key factor. The background illumination appears different. In one image, there seems to be light reflecting from a neighboring house across the street. In the other, the environment appears darker. None of this is proof of a separate date, but it is enough to justify further analysis. And here is the most important limitation investigators are facing. There are no usable timestamps, no definitive date markers, which means the timeline cannot be scientifically anchored. Some theories suggest the footage may be connected to the night neighbors were asked to review their door camera recordings, believed to be around January 11th. If that is true, then the second image could potentially represent behavior occurring weeks before the disappearance. That possibility raises a disturbing question. Was the suspect scouting the home in advance? Was this pre-event surveillance? Or is this simply the same individual captured under different lighting conditions? There is also speculation, but no confirmation, about whether someone assisted the suspect. For example, some have wondered whether the backpack could have been removed and stored elsewhere before a second approach to the property. But at this stage, investigators are careful not to commit to that interpretation, because without timestamps, the data remains incomplete. As the analysis continues, you're about to hear Nancy Grace challenge investigative reporter Dave Mack directly about the theory that the suspect may have been skulking around the neighborhood earlier, possibly weeks before the abduction. Pay attention to the exchange, because it highlights just how uncertain the timeline truly is.
Okay, before we begin patting ourselves on the back, I think the FBI and Google were a little bit ahead of us, Dave Mack. But I want to analyze the two photos. Put them side by side, please, because a working theory now, are these photos on the same date? Are they different dates? And the significance is, did the perp approach the home of Nancy Guthrie on a previous date to case it? Now, look on the right. What clues do we see? Obviously, number one, he's not wearing a backpack. He is not wearing his holster. He appears to be wearing the same pants and jacket, the same ski mask, but notice on the right, the rocks on the ground are in a different configuration. We know Nancy Guthrie had a yard person. Were those rocks removed? Were they somehow repositioned? And he is there on a different date. The lighting is different in the background. We see lights from apparently another home across the street. We are looking at the clues just like law enforcement and everyone else. Do you see something different in the background to indicate this is from an earlier date? Now, back out to Dave Mack joining us. Dave Mack, Crime Stories investigative reporter. There are no timestamps on this, so we can't tell. Do we have any idea if this is allegedly connected to the night that neighbors were asked to look through their door cams, look through their surveillance video? I believe it was January 11. Is that a working theory, that the perp was skulking on January 11?
That was the date that neighbors were asked to look over their surveillance video at their homes. It was September 11th between 9 p.m. and midnight. That's a 3-hour swath of time they're looking at. And now that you look at this separate photo, Nancy, if they were looking ahead of time, you're only talking a couple of weeks. I mean, it seems like a long time now, but really you're talking 3 weeks before the alleged kidnapping took place. And is this photo that we're looking at now without the backpack and without the gun, is that what we're seeing on somebody else's surveillance video that investigators are trying to find? Was this an earlier date? There is no timestamp. There is no date. So we're left with really just speculation at this point. Could have been taken the day of. It could have been taken later. Did the perpetrator have help? You know, did he take the backpack off and put it in the car? I mean, we really can go...
Hold on, because this is where the investigation gets technically interesting. If the suspect was captured on different dates, it could imply coordinated movement or assistance. That possibility has been raised in discussion, but it is not confirmed. Now the conversation shifts to digital forensics. Straight out to Scott Aker, a digital evidence specialist and former homicide investigator with extensive experience in cellular and forensic tracking analysis. Scott was also involved in early digital location technology development through the FBI's cellular analysis programs. One of the key investigative challenges in this case is the removal, or more accurately, the absence of usable timestamp metadata. The critical point here is this. The Guthrie family reportedly did not have a full cloud subscription for their surveillance system. Because of that, some data transmission details were not automatically preserved on personal devices. The footage was essentially transmitted from the camera hardware to cloud storage, where forensic teams attempted large-scale data extraction. Investigators worked with technology partners to reconstruct possible video fragments by analyzing massive datasets. But despite these efforts, the images themselves do not contain verifiable date and time markers, which means the exact moment these photographs were captured cannot be scientifically confirmed. And without that temporal anchor, investigators are left with interpretation rather than certainty. That is why law enforcement officials have warned against drawing conclusions purely from visual comparison alone, because while the images may suggest behavioral patterns, they do not yet provide definitive proof of when those events occurred. In the clip you're about to see, Nancy Grace presses the digital forensics explanation further, questioning why timestamps were never embedded or recovered, and what that means for the reliability of the surveillance record. Watch closely, because the answer could determine how much weight investigators can place on the Porch footage.
Hold on. Okay, I see what you're saying. Did he have help? If this was on different dates, that opens up the evidence in a major way. Straight out to Scott Aker joining us, digital forensics expert, former homicide with Norfolk, Virginia PD, 12 years, founding member of the FBI Cellular Analysis Survey team. That's who's responsible for coming up with the digital data we've gotten so far. Once Nanos allowed the feds in, that was an unfortunate delay. But not only that, Aker contacted CAST about using the Bluetooth Blue Fly technology to try and find Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker. It started on a helicopter, it moved to a drone, and that went on for some time. Scott, contacted them with that suggestion. Scott, why were the date and timestamps removed from this video? Because if they weren't, we would know a lot more tonight.
It would be great if we had the date timestamps on the video, but you got to remember the Guthrie family did not have a subscription to Nest, and in doing so, that data was not sent to their phones with a date and timestamp. So it was basically sent from the camera to the cloud, and then CAST was able to talk to Google, which we have a relationship in the past with dealing with other stuff, and had them kind of dig into, to scrape all that data to try to get down to these videos that we are seeing. Problem is, there's no dates and timestamps on them. So there is a lot of speculation on when these two different camera shots were made. And we know that the sheriff has said, don't make any speculations about this at this point in time.
Before we jump deeper into technical theories, let's slow down and translate this into plain language. Because digital forensics can sound complicated, but the core question is actually simple. Were the timestamps removed, or were they never recorded in the first place? According to the digital evidence analysis, the cameras were likely connected to Wi-Fi transmission. When the camera recorded activity, the data was sent automatically through the internet to cloud storage systems. If the homeowner did not have a full subscription plan, some metadata, including precise time and date stamps, may not have been embedded or preserved during transmission. This means investigators cannot definitively confirm the exact moment these images were captured, not because the timestamps were deliberately erased, but because they may never have been generated in the first place. So at this stage, there is no scientific certainty. about when the camera was activated during those recording events. That uncertainty is what is driving much of the speculation surrounding the porch footage. In the next clip, the discussion continues as experts examine how digital evidence is reconstructed when metadata is missing, and what that means for the investigation moving forward.
Okay, so wait, please. Before we start dragging Nanos into this and all of his observations, could you tell me, in regular people talk, Iker, were the date and timestamps scratched off in the process of reviving this video, or were they never there?
I don't know for sure. I suspect that the camera is connected to Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi information is immediately sent to the cloud via the internet, and then it's logged in and then sent to the subscriber if they had a subscription. Somewhere in that aspect where they didn't have a subscription, it didn't get a date and time. So thus we can't be specific on when those cameras were activated.
At this point, the discussion turns to interpretation rather than technical certainty. And to be very clear, there is no evidence confirming that the footage was altered during a scratching or overwriting recovery process. The more likely explanation is that the timestamps were either never embedded in the recording metadata or were not preserved during transmission to cloud storage. Digital video recovery is a delicate process. When investigators attempt to retrieve overwritten or fragmented footage, they work carefully, layer by layer, much like peeling paint from a wall. If you move too aggressively during recovery, you risk destroying lower-level data that may still contain useful information. You don't want to remove level 4 data while trying to access level 5. That is why forensic extraction requires extreme precision. Now the analysis shifts again to behavioral interpretation. Chris McDonough, a veteran homicide investigator with more than 300 homicide cases reviewed, is asked to evaluate the porch images from a common sense, investigative perspective rather than purely digital science. Starting from the assumption that the two photographs are related, one detail immediately stands out. The lighting behind the suspect appears different. In the footage where the suspect is walking toward the property, there is visible backlighting from an external source. That suggests some type of illumination behind him, possibly from nearby environmental lighting. This observation becomes important when comparing the second image, where the background appears darker. If the lighting environment is different, it may suggest the images were captured at different times. However, that alone does not prove they were taken on separate nights. It remains an investigative hypothesis, not a verified conclusion. As the conversation continues, the investigator is asked a direct question, a question that sits at the heart of the porch footage theory. Was the suspect approaching without a backpack first, and then returning later with one? Or are these simply variations of the same moment captured under different visual conditions? In the next segment, you'll hear the investigative response to that possibility.
So you're thinking it never had a date and time stamped on it, not that it was lost in the scratching process. That's actually neither here nor there. I was just curious because you're the first person to explain the scratching process about when things are, video is taped over. It's like peeling away paint. You scratch, and if you're trying to get to level 4, and you're on 5, you don't want to scratch off level 4. You've got to be very, very meticulous. Also joining us, in addition to Dave, Mack, Scott, Iker, and Dr. Bethany, Chris McDonough is with us tonight. He is a seasoned homicide investigator. He is the star of the Interview Room on YouTube, and he has over 300 homicide investigations under his belt. Okay, neither you nor I are digital forensic experts, but we've solved a lot of cases through good old-fashioned detective work and common sense. What's your take, McDonough? What is your take? Was this the same night and the guy approaches without a backpack, then he goes back and gets the backpack and approaches with it, the backpack? I mean, does that make sense? Maybe. Or is he skulking on 2 different dates?
Yeah, so if we start with the premise like you're discussing here, Nancy, about looking at the two photographs as a whole. The first thing that strikes me is in the video, when he's walking up to the property, you can clearly see there's a backlit illumination of some sort. And so,
hold it. Control room, please play the video as McDonough is speaking. Okay, go ahead, Chris. Thank you.
Listen carefully to the analysis that follows, because what you are about to see is not definitive proof, but an investigative interpretation of visual clues. As the suspect approaches the porch, one detail stands out immediately. There appears to be a light source positioned behind him. On the ground, a shadow can be seen. Chris McDonough observes that the shadow pattern is consistent with what would be expected during a night, illuminated by a full moon. Interestingly, records of lunar phases indicate that a full moon was present around the time being discussed. Now shift your attention to the second photograph. In the frame where the individual is standing near the archway, the same backlighting effect is not visible. No clearly defined shadow is cast across the sidewalk, and the area behind the suspect appears noticeably darker. From an investigative standpoint, this observation raises an important possibility, not a conclusion, that the images may have been captured on two different nights. Authorities caution that lighting differences alone cannot scientifically confirm separate dates. Camera exposure settings can adjust automatically. Nearby environmental lighting can change without human intervention, and natural variations in night illumination can create visual inconsistencies. So while the pattern is concerning, it remains circumstantial. What makes this detail more unsettling is the behavioral implication. If the images were captured on different nights, it could suggest repeated proximity to Nancy Guthrie's home, potential scouting behavior, possible pre-event surveillance, or the presence of someone monitoring the property before the disappearance. However, investigators cannot confirm that interpretation at this stage, because lighting variation, without timestamp verification, is not sufficient to establish a definitive timeline. As the analysis continues, the focus now shifts to what experts consider one of the most troubling possibilities surrounding the porch footage.
that's right. And so you can clearly see that there's some type of light source behind him. And that night, as he's approaching the porch, you can see a shadow on the ground. So I looked that up, and it was right there, you can see the shadow. That means it was a full moon that evening, okay? And I looked it up, and in fact, it was. And so the second now, if we look at the second photograph of the gentleman standing, at the archway there, we don't see that behind him backlit like that. We don't see a shadow being cast onto the sidewalk as he's standing there, right there. And you see it's also much darker behind him. So that would lead me towards, from an investigative analysis aspect of this is possible. It could be two separate nights. Now, like Scott has said, we don't know that for sure. However, from an investigative analysis aspect, investigators are looking at this and going, okay, why is it so dark behind him here? And then that other video, why is it not so dark at that point? Because it appears it could have been two separate nights. The most disturbing...
Another possibility was raised during the discussion. The idea that environmental lighting may have been intentionally altered. For example, it was suggested that a floodlight near the porch could have been disabled. If a floodlight were removed or turned off, it could explain why the second image appears darker in the background compared to the first. However, this remains only a hypothesis. There is no confirmed evidence that any light source was deliberately tampered with. Investigators also examined how infrared technology behaves in low-light surveillance. In the footage, the suspect appears to activate a personal light source while approaching, suggesting he may have been struggling to see clearly in front of him. This detail is important because it provides insight into behavior rather than identity. Now consider the most disturbing interpretation if the two images were captured at different times. In that scenario, the suspect's second approach appears more calculated. According to investigative commentary, the second appearance may show signs of preparation. If true, the individual may have returned while carrying or intending to use a weapon. That observation represents what investigators describe as a potential escalation in behavioral pattern. Not proof of intent, but a possible indication of increased risk if the two photographs represent separate encounters.
Okay,
Piece.
hold
If
on.
an-
Let me throw a possibility into your scenario.
Absolutely.
We know that a floodlight was disabled. When he approaches, and it's very well lit in the background, as you were pointing out, Chris, if the floodlight was taken out, let's just say he goes, okay, I'm going to get rid of the floodlight. What if, could that possibly explain the lack of light in the other photo, as opposed to the waxing waning moon? I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility.
It's always a possibility, Nancy, but you see the infrared is responding to the light in this particular video here. And you see he's even turning on his light. So he's having a hard time, seeing exactly, what's in front of him at this moment. So, but I think if these are two separate times, hypothetically, at this point, the most disturbing part of this, if they are separated, is he came the second time armed and prepared to use deadly force. That is an uptick in his behavioral pattern.
The investigation continues with meticulous caution. Authorities are reviewing the available evidence, repeatedly examining every frame, every visual cue, and every potential clue embedded in the footage. Follow-up questions were directed toward the investigative team regarding theories that the suspect may have been present in the neighborhood on an earlier occasion. However, according to reports referenced in the discussion, there is currently no scientific proof supporting that claim. Without verified timestamps or corroborating digital metadata, any conclusion about the suspect's prior presence would remain speculative. Investigators emphasize that speculation cannot substitute for forensic confirmation. At this stage, there is no official finding that the Porch individual was skulking in the area on a previous date. What remains clear is that the video evidence requires extensive review. Multiple analysts, including digital forensic specialists and homicide investigators, agree that the footage contains several layers of information that must be carefully interpreted. As Chris McDonough highlighted earlier, the clips are complex and contain visual elements that require both technical and behavioral analysis. But complexity is not the same as certainty, and until investigators obtain more verifiable data, the Porch footage will continue to be treated as an object of ongoing examination rather than definitive proof. Another critical piece of information emerged during the investigation. A 911 dispatch recording linked to the same early morning window in which Nancy Guthrie disappeared. According to the call log, between approximately 2:01 a.m. and 2:04 a.m., a witness reported seeing a woman screaming from inside a moving vehicle. The location referenced in the dispatch was near Oracle and River. The caller described what appeared to be a female, hanging partially out of a vehicle window, shouting for help. The vehicle was reported as a dark gray or blue Chevrolet Malibu. No license plate number was observed. The caller also noted that the vehicle door appeared to be open, and that the woman was wearing all black clothing. What makes this detail particularly significant is the timing. The dispatch recording corresponds closely to the same early morning period. Investigators believe the disappearance may have occurred, and geographically, the sighting was reported approximately 3 miles from Nancy Guthrie's residence. At this stage, investigators cannot confirm whether this 911 call is directly connected to the kidnapping. However, the coincidence of timing and proximity has prompted authorities to review the recording, interview the caller if possible, and search for surveillance cameras along the potential travel route of the vehicle described. As investigative reporter Dave Mack explained, leads like this are treated seriously because they help narrow the search window. But until further evidence is verified, the connection between the dispatch, call, and the disappearance remains unconfirmed. In the next segment, investigators discuss whether additional camera systems along the route may have captured the vehicle described in the call. At this stage of the investigation, authorities cannot confirm whether the 911 dispatch call is connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. However, investigators are not dismissing the lead. The reported sighting was close to her residence and occurred within the same early morning timeframe in which the kidnapping is believed to have taken place. Because of those similarities, officials emphasize that every possibility must be evaluated. Chris McDonough reinforced this approach, explaining that standard investigative procedure would include interviewing the 911 caller to clarify what was observed. Investigators would also attempt to determine whether additional surveillance cameras were operating in the surrounding area. If functional camera systems are identified along possible travel routes, authorities may review those recordings to search for the described dark-colored Chevrolet Malibu. This process is often referred to as lead verification, checking each detail against independent evidence before drawing conclusions. Because in complex investigations, proximity in time and location does not automatically prove causation, but it does warrant further examination. And as the search continues, investigators are working to determine whether this dispatch report represents a critical clue or simply another tragic coincidence. In large-scale investigations, leads often arrive faster than they can be processed. According to digital and field investigation specialists, this creates what is known as lead overload, a situation where hundreds or even thousands of potential clues must be evaluated. Scott Aker explained that in active command post operations, investigators typically employ a triage system. The purpose of this system is simple. Separate immediate action leads from lower priority information. High priority leads are dispatched to field investigators right away. In this case, the report of a woman screaming near the same time window as the disappearance would likely be classified as a lead requiring urgent verification. The standard procedure would include locating and interviewing the 911 caller to better understand the observation. Authorities would also attempt to determine whether responding officers were able to locate the individual described in the call. Investigators would then cross-check surveillance recordings, traffic cameras, and nearby residential camera systems to confirm whether the reported event actually occurred. Scott emphasized that whether a lead is ultimately connected to the case or not, it must still be documented and reviewed. Because in complex missing person investigations, relevance is not always immediately apparent. Thousands of similar data points may be analyzed before a meaningful pattern emerges. And that is the reality investigators are facing as they continue working through the overwhelming volume of information generated by this case. Another line of investigation focused on surveillance. Footage from a nearby Circle K location, close to Nancy Guthrie's residence. According to investigative reports, law enforcement attempted to obtain video recordings from the store's parking lot, specifically searching for images of a vehicle described as dark gray, dark blue, or similar in color. The interest centered on whether a vehicle matching that description was present during the early morning time frame associated with the disappearance. Authorities were able to secure surveillance footage from another Circle K location, positioned slightly farther from the residence. This second store was situated along a route between Nancy Guthrie's home and the home of her daughter Annie. Investigators reviewed the recordings carefully, focusing on a particular vehicle that drew attention during the analysis. However, at this stage, there has been no public confirmation that the vehicle observed in the Circle K footage has been directly linked to the disappearance. The review process remains ongoing as forensic and field teams continue examining every available visual and digital lead. Because in cases like this, even seemingly minor traffic or convenience store, surveillance can sometimes reveal movement patterns that help reconstruct the timeline of events. Attention now returns to the Porch footage and to a theory that has generated significant discussion. Investigators are examining the possibility that the suspect may have been present near the home prior to the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. One date frequently referenced in the discussion is January 11th, the day law enforcement reportedly asked neighbors to review any available home surveillance recordings. This has led to speculation that a second, skulking incident may have occurred around that time. If the suspect was indeed present earlier, it could significantly expand the scope of the investigation, because that would introduce the possibility of pre-event behavior. In investigative science, behavior surrounding a crime is often categorized into three phases: pre-incident, incident, and post-incident activity. Pre-incident behavior can include surveillance, concealment, or environmental familiarization. If an individual attempted to hide their identity during a potential earlier visit, that would suggest deliberate preparation rather than spontaneous action. Chris McDonough also pointed out an important observation regarding similar burglary patterns in the region. During that period, many residential burglary incidents captured on ring style. Camera systems showed suspects who were not wearing facial coverings. The suspect in this case, however, appears to have been masked. That difference could be significant when analyzing behavioral intent. If authorities could confirm that the Porch individual was present on January 11 or another earlier date, investigators would gain access to additional potential evidence. That could include historical camera recordings, mobile device location signals, and possible license plate detection data from that time frame, because establishing prior presence would broaden the investigative window and potentially reveal movement patterns leading up to the disappearance. And that possibility is one of the reasons investigators continue to review every frame of the Porch footage with extreme caution. The increase in the reward to $1 million introduces another strategic and psychological dimension to the investigation. In many missing person and homicide investigations, reward incentives are often designed to encourage individuals with information to overcome fear and come forward. As Chris McDonough pointed out, information often exists within personal networks surrounding a case. Historically, it is frequently someone close to the suspect, a neighbor, acquaintance, or community observer, who notices unusual behavior. The offer of anonymity is especially important, because even when individuals possess critical information, fear can be a powerful barrier. If someone is involved in the crime, or even indirectly aware of it, they may be weighing several emotional and practical risks before deciding to speak. The reality is that a large financial reward can create a psychological tipping point, not because everyone is motivated by money alone, but because it can shift how a person evaluates risk versus consequence. Savannah Guthrie's public message was also framed as an emotional appeal rather than a confrontation. The underlying theme was simple: return Nancy, or provide the information needed to bring closure. However, investigators also recognize that while rewards can generate new leads, they do not guarantee actionable intelligence. Some individuals may still remain silent due to fear, loyalty, or personal involvement in the events under investigation. And that is why authorities continue to combine community outreach with technical forensic analysis as the search for answers continues. We are now turning to the forensic side of this case, the DNA evidence that could ultimately hold answers. Earlier reporting suggested a backpack found nearby might have been connected to the case. Law enforcement has now ruled that out. It was simply too close to a homeless embankment, and they've identified the owner. But the DNA evidence, that is where real investigative science comes into play. Joining us is Savannah Ryan, a laboratory director and DNA forensic expert with over 25 years of experience at Pure Gold Forensics and Ryan Forensics. She breaks down what investigators are up against.
Certainly, being out in the elements can have an effect, a detrimental effect on DNA. We do know that things like heat and humidity, exposure to rain, those can, or any other kind of moisture, can degrade DNA. So it can start to break down the DNA molecule, which makes it more difficult for us to be able to then go back to it and copy those segments of the DNA. If it was indeed blood on a rock, I would expect a large amount of DNA to be present in the blood. We do know body fluids tend to have lots of DNA. So that, you could probably just swab the rock. If this is something they think a very small amount of blood is present, or they think this rock was somehow touched or handled, then I would consider using something called the MVAC, a wet vacuum method of collecting DNA. It's really good at collecting from porous surfaces, something like a rock where the liquid that's being sprayed down can get into all those cracks and crevices and then be collected and tested.
Wow, I hadn't thought of a wet vac. Thank you. Susanna, I also want to talk to you about the newly discovered DNA inside the Guthrie home. I don't mean new DNA that was just deposited there. I mean newly discovered when the feds came in after local authorities had already searched the home. Will every person that had worked on the case and been in the home, since there was a time lapse, several days, if not a week, before the feds were finally invited in. That was an unfortunate delay. That said, will each one of those people have to be ruled out by giving their own DNA to compare to the newly discovered DNA? How does that work?
I think that would be a good idea, just because we know that so many people have been in and out of the home to, process the scene, collect DNA, and as careful as they probably are, this is not, saying anything against them as investigators, but no matter how careful you are, it is possible to transfer your own DNA inadvertently. Even if you're wearing gloves, you happen to touch your face, then you touch something else, you could get your DNA on that item. So if they're getting DNA profiles and they are unknowns, they have the family members, people that they know were in the home, they've ruled all of those people out, it would definitely be a good idea before they spend a lot of time, money, and effort to try to identify an unknown person, that they rule out everyone who has been an investigator in that home that could potentially have touched or contaminated an item. So I think they probably have a database, an internal database of people who have been in the home. They can quickly compare any unknown profiles to that sort of internal database. And if they are left still with an unidentified profile, then that's what they're going to want to focus on and spend their time, money, and effort on trying to identify that person.
So to Suzanne's point, I've noticed that floor mat, that welcome mat into the front door is still there. The authorities need to go get that mat, because you watch that suspect, he is standing in that video on that mat. And what Suzanne's talking about, the MVAC, you could actually pull DNA potentially from his shoes, and keep me in the right lane here, Suzanne, that, if he's got some type of transfer, it could still be on that mat on the front porch. So Savannah needs to get that mat, or at least get the authorities to go grab that mat at the front.
What about it, Susanna?
Yeah, so yes, I would have concerns about the amount of DNA, number of contributors. When you're walking around, you've got DNA that you're picking up, that you're constantly transferring. Now, if he's standing on there for a while and he's got that flashlight in his mouth and he's looking down and maybe some saliva comes out, that's where, perhaps then we have one contributor that's a little bit more. So we have someone that we can pull out and isolate from all the other sort of background DNA, the other contributors. Certainly in a case like this where it seems like they're testing just about everything, then yes, I am surprised that they didn't collect that. It did seem, at one point we talked about the plants, the vegetation that he held in his hand. It seemed like that was outside for an extended amount of time as well. So it doesn't mean that it's too late to test, but the sooner you can get these items, the better. So yes, could be tested for sure.
The focus tonight is on a bloody glove and a rock discovered by a couple near the scene. These seemingly small pieces can carry crucial DNA, but there are challenges. Exposure to the elements, heat, humidity, rain, and other moisture can degrade DNA, breaking down the molecules and making recovery more difficult. If there's a significant amount of blood present, DNA collection is relatively straightforward. A swab may be sufficient. But if there's only a trace, or the rock has been handled, experts use more advanced methods. One such technique is the MVAC, a wet vacuum collection system designed for porous surfaces. It sprays a collection fluid over the rock, penetrating cracks and crevices, then vacuums the material into a sample for testing. This process maximizes the chance of obtaining a usable DNA profile, even under difficult environmental conditions. It's meticulous work. But in cases like Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, every detail counts. DNA evidence could ultimately corroborate other investigative leads or, in the best case, directly identify a suspect. The discussion then shifts to another important forensic consideration: DNA. Evidence discovered inside the Guthrie home after federal investigators were later invited to re-examine the scene. The delay between the initial search and the federal review is acknowledged as an unfortunate but not uncommon complication in complex investigations, because during that time gap, multiple individuals may have entered and exited the residence. While processing the scene, collecting samples and conducting investigative procedures, even when investigators follow strict protective protocols, wearing gloves and other protective gear, there is still a possibility of unintentional DNA transfer. This phenomenon is known as secondary or touch DNA transfer. For that reason, forensic experts often recommend creating an internal reference database of DNA profiles belonging to everyone who accessed the home during the investigation. That would include law enforcement personnel, forensic technicians, and any other authorized individuals. Any unknown DNA profile recovered from the scene would then be compared against that internal database first. The goal is to eliminate contamination risk before investing significant resources into suspect identification. If unknown profiles remain after elimination testing, investigators can then focus their efforts on identifying the source of that DNA. Another observation raised during the discussion concerns the front porch welcome mat that remains in place near the entryway, because the suspect was reportedly standing directly on that mat in the surveillance footage. Investigators believe there may be potential for trace DNA transfer. In theory, biological material could be transferred from the suspect's footwear onto the mat's surface. If feasible, forensic teams could consider collecting samples from that mat using appropriate trace evidence collection techniques. However, whether the mat is still viable for testing would depend on environmental exposure, contamination risk, and how long it has remained in place since the recorded event. As with all pieces of evidence in this investigation, authorities are proceeding carefully, balancing the urgency of the search with the scientific standards required for reliable forensic analysis. Susanna Ryan also raised an important technical concern regarding the complexity of DNA mixtures that may be present in this case. When multiple people have been in or near the same location, biological material can accumulate from different sources over time. This creates what forensic scientists call a mixed DNA sample, meaning more than one contributor may be present. The challenge in mixed samples is separating the dominant DNA profile from background or secondary traces. In this scenario, investigators are particularly interested in the possibility of isolating a single contributor if conditions allowed for it. For example, if the suspect remains stationary on the porch for a period of time, there is speculation that trace biological material could potentially be deposited. One hypothetical possibility discussed was that if the suspect was using a flashlight held near the mouth, small amounts of saliva could theoretically transfer to nearby surfaces. If such a trace were present, it might help forensic teams isolate a clearer DNA signal from surrounding background contamination. Another point raised was the vegetation, reportedly handled by the suspect in some footage. Outdoor biological samples, such as plant material, can sometimes retain trace DNA if handled and preserved under suitable conditions. However, timing is critical. The sooner such items are collected and preserved, the higher the probability of obtaining usable forensic results. While it is not necessarily too late to test evidence items that may have been exposed to the environment, degradation over time can reduce DNA quality. That is why investigators emphasize prompt collection whenever possible. In this case, authorities appear to be testing a wide range of materials as part of their comprehensive forensic strategy. Another development in this case involves community search efforts. Reports indicate that some volunteer search groups have organized independent search activities, despite requests from authorities to pause unauthorized searching. These volunteers have been gathering in local meeting points, including a retail parking area, to coordinate their search routes. One area of interest mentioned during the discussion is a location referred to locally as underground Tucson. This area contains drainage tunnel systems where homeless individuals sometimes seek shelter during the night. The location is situated approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's residence. Interestingly, the abandoned backpack previously discussed was reportedly discovered near this general region, though investigators have ruled that item unrelated to the case. Authorities have cautioned against independent searching because uncoordinated activity can sometimes disrupt active investigation zones or introduce safety risks for volunteers. However, many community members continue searching because of emotional motivation rather than official directive. Their primary intention, according to reports, is to contribute to the effort to bring Nancy Guthrie home. The frustration expressed by some volunteers reflects growing impatience with the pace of visible search operations near the immediate residential area. As the investigation continues, authorities are balancing organized law enforcement strategy with community concern, emphasizing that all search activities should remain coordinated through official channels. The total reward offered in connection with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has now surpassed $1 million. When combined with the existing reward of approximately $22,000, the potential incentive reaches roughly $1.2 million. Authorities believe the anonymity option is critical for encouraging individuals with information to come forward. If you have any knowledge, or even suspect that you may have information, you are urged to contact the toll-free tip line at 800-225-5324. You may also choose to remain anonymous by calling 520-882-7463. Investigators emphasize that even small details could be important in helping reconstruct what happened. As this investigation continues, the search for Nancy Guthrie remains active. The plea from Savannah Guthrie and her family is simple, that anyone with information should speak up and help bring clarity to the case. Tonight's discussion reflects both the human and investigative dimensions of this story, and as Savannah has expressed, the family asks the public to continue praying and hoping for resolution. Thank you for watching Unraveled Crime. I'll see you in the next investigation.